Welcome to the campaign to end loneliness, research and policy hub, talking this morning about the psychology of loneliness. I'm Paul Cann, and I've been around the campaign since the beginning. I wanted to extend a very warm welcome to you all, wherever you're at. Good morning to you all. Good morning, a very early morning to those colleagues from the States. Good evening to colleagues from Australia. Warm welcome to all of you, because you are a very important community. And, from the word go with the campaign to end loneliness, we've tried to listen to people who are immersed in this area. And with that listening in mind, we would very much like to listen to what you have to say, particularly in the breakout rooms when we come to that, and we'll help with that in a minute. If you can please contribute in your various breakout rooms, that would be fantastic. And we are in fact asking each breakout room to find a scribe, ask somebody to be a scribe, and then email their thoughts to Kalpa Karicha, who we'll hear from in a minute. But it is really important that we listen to what you have to say. And if you also want to enter comments on the chat button, that's fine too, because the campaign will look at those comments and study them and respond. I just wanted to say two things before handing over to Kalpa. And first of all, just to say again that the focus of this campaign is on this emotion cluster called loneliness. And that's what we devote attention to, understanding the word and what it means in terms of this negative experience felt by so many, young and old. And we recognize, of course, that loneliness has a wider context. It very often is situated within issues, wider issues like social exclusion, like inequality, like the communities that we all live in. But that is where we're focused and will remain focused on that issue. And that's what we would like to listen to you about. And the second thing I really wanted to say is that this report today, which we're launching, The Psychology of Loneliness, put together by UCL in conjunction with the campaign, is a really decisive point in our development, because in terms of our moving on, it's taking us to a more rounded understanding of what loneliness is and how we ourselves as individuals can interact with our own loneliness, what we can do, how we can approach that issue. So this is a situation which has happened. We have been listening to the researchers all along, and from the beginning, we listened to social gerontology, we listened to evolutionary psychology, we listened to the very pragmatic approaches, and now today we're hearing from those who are very immersed in the field of emotional psychological approaches. And so that's all I'm going to say for now. I'd like to now hand over, please, to Kalpa Karicha, who is the head of research at the Campaign to End Loneliness, and she's going to take us through the report and her overview. Thank you, Kalpa.
So thank you, Paul. It's great to be launching this report today. So thank you so much for joining us. So why the focus on psychology? Why does it matter? Well, a good place to start is this Perlman and Peplau's well-known definition, which cites this unwelcome feeling, which is part of loneliness. So it's an emotional response to a situation, an emotional response to the social relationships that aren't as we'd like them to be. So that is a very good place to start. And we know that when these unwelcome feelings become chronic, they actually start to affect our relationships. But when we think about the type of support that there is for people who are lonely, I mean, there is a huge variety, of course, but arguably there's been a greater focus on social relationships and bringing people together than there has been on the unwelcome feelings. So a greater focus on the social rather than the psychological. And we think this is another part of the picture that we need to pay attention to, particularly at a time when socializing and bringing people together is so difficult. So we know an awful lot about the risk factors for loneliness. We know what can make people feel excluded, the social and structural factors that contribute to this, as well as the life events, of course. And these can possibly be described as the external factors. But we know less about the internal factors that contribute to someone's experience and shape their experience of loneliness, how they perceive their situation and how able they feel to respond, importantly. So we spoke to a number of people during this work, and one of the participants in our focus group, who was both lonely and bereaved, described both of these factors. So she described how she missed her partner, but she also described how the loneliness was in her head. And what loneliness feels like can be actually really hard to describe. And here are some words from qualitative research where people have tried to describe what loneliness means to them. And so, because loneliness is an emotional response, it's important that we draw on the insights from psychology more than perhaps we currently do. Okay, so what do we know from the research so far? The starting point for this piece of work was a commission scoping review that Paul mentioned, which was carried out by a team from the Loneliness and Social Isolation and Mental Health Network at UCL. And they conducted an extensive exercise where they identified psychological factors that are shown to increase the likelihood of loneliness, trigger it, or maintain it, so cause it to become more chronic. And there's a range of factors that were identified, and they overlap and interact, and I'm going to present some of the main ones now. So firstly, attributional style. This is how somebody understands the reason for their loneliness, how they explain it to themselves. And there are two key factors within this. Firstly, whether loneliness is something to do with themselves, so it's an internal attribution, or whether it's something to do with the situation they find themselves in, so something more external. And this is important because people who are chronically lonely are more likely to believe that their loneliness is to do with themselves. And of course, this can impact on self-esteem, which is also linked, a psychological factor linked to loneliness. The other attribution is considering whether the loneliness is stable or variable over time. And this is important because if you think that your situation's unlikely to change, it can have a huge impact on your motivation and your self-efficacy, so your belief in your own ability. So people with long-standing chronic loneliness are more likely to have an internal and stable attributional style. Another key factor is social cognition, which is a slightly awkward term if you're not a psychologist, I think, but it describes how people perceive or make sense of social situations. And we know that if you're lonely, you can anticipate and interpret social situations quite differently than if you're not lonely. You can feel much more fearful of them, sensitive to social rejection cues, feel a greater burden or sense of distrust of others. And the sense of loss of confidence that can come about from all of this can lead to a downward spiral where people withdraw further, and which in turn, this can sort of make them feel worse, really. And there's another quote here from one of our focus group participants who was lonely, who described quite powerfully how difficult it was for her to step out of her front door. Okay. Next, not surprisingly, mental health and cognitive impairment were identified as factors in the review. And although loneliness is not a mental health problem, there's a lot of evidence that the two overlap and influence each other. So we know that loneliness can contribute to mental health problems, in particular depression and anxiety, and social anxiety within that in particular, which is really an overwhelming fear of social situations. And conversely, having a mental health problem can lead to loneliness. So this does beg the question, does addressing one help the other? And there's also a similar two-way relationship with loneliness and dementia, and this may be explained by the link between having less social participation, less social contact, and less stimulation. But this topic is worthy of much further exploration than we can give it credit to this morning. So the factors I've mentioned so far have really been about the individual, but we know that we live our lives in wider society and are influenced by its cultural norms. So social identity was identified as another factor, and this really describes the groups that we think ourselves as part of, where we feel we belong. So social identity can make it easier or harder to take part in social situations. And a very simple example of that is that we may not want to join something that we feel is aimed at older people if we don't consider ourselves old. And another important factor is ageism, which may be internalized, so can affect what people expect of themselves as they age. Or this can be at a societal level where it describes how society perceives older people and their value. And we know that internalized ageism can sort of generate a self-fulfilling prophecy, so that if you believe that loneliness is an inevitable part of getting older, you're more likely to experience it in later life. So this is a very quick gallop through what was found in the review, and I hope it's whetted your appetite to go and look and read further in the report. I've talked about the main ones, and there were additional ones around personality, difficult early life, and coping styles that were also identified. And whilst there's a lot to learn still about how all these factors interact and overlap, I think it's clear to say that there is a strong evidence that psychological factors play a part in our understanding of loneliness. And what we need to consider next is what psychological techniques might be helpful in supporting people who are lonely. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Kalpa. We've given our speakers a terrifyingly short period of time in which to say their bit. You will get a blog post, or there will be a blog post giving the slides to these presentations, which will come out after this event. And of course, the report itself will be available to download from the Campaign to End Loneliness website. But I'm going to go quickly on now to invite Guy Robertson to talk to us. Guy is a champion of this whole area. He has been involved with it for a long time, and he is the leader of a thing called Positive Aging Associates, and he's also a colleague, a member of the management group of the campaign. Guy.
Thank you. So just to recap, loneliness is a feeling, and it's a feeling induced by thoughts, by our beliefs, our attitudes, our interpretations of the situations that we're facing. And that then results in certain behaviors, which in some cases can be withdrawal from social contact, or loss of confidence, or loss of self-esteem. So that's very important understanding, but clearly we need to work out, so how can we rectify that situation? How can we develop approaches which can help people address that? So we've looked at the research that there is, And we were surprised that there's actually a lot more research than we might have thought at the beginning. And one of the most important individual pieces of research is that conducted by Massey in 2011. And Massey looked at 4 primary interventions to address loneliness. They looked at improving social skills, enhancing social support, increasing opportunities for social contact, which is one of the major things that happens currently, and finally addressing maladaptive social cognition, which is about the negative thoughts about self-worth and perceptions we have of others. And what Massey found was the most effective interventions were those which addressed maladaptive social cognition. And whilst the different interventions included different types of approaches to social cognition, cognitive behavioral therapy and psychological reframing was part of all of them. And then the UCL literature review that we commissioned concluded, after an extensive literature review, that there is preliminary research evidence that interventions that address the psychological factors involved in loneliness can be successful, though many have not yet been fully evaluated. The strongest research evidence was found for cognitive behavioral interventions, which are designed to change individuals' thoughts and feelings about loneliness. So cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the approaches we think is central to possible ways of addressing loneliness, psychological approaches. But we also found evidence of the effectiveness of mindfulness and of positive psychology. And they all kind of share some common features. And some of the underpinning ideas from all of them is firstly that change is possible. People can change. Awareness of thoughts and feeling, people getting a greater awareness of their own thoughts and feelings is central to how we can change. Thought patterns can be habitual, and when they are negative, they can be problematic. And changing thinking can change feelings. So they are kind of underpinning ideas in all 3 of these approaches. Looking firstly at cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. CBT, it depends on a better understanding of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So that's one of the first things that working with CBT, people would begin to develop a greater appreciation, understanding of their thoughts, feelings, behaviors. It's about paying attention and awareness to the content of automatic thoughts. So a very simplistic example would be the way that if you're in a group and talking to people and someone talking to you suddenly looks beyond you, some people might have an instinctive automatic feeling about, oh my God, I'm boring, they don't want to talk with me, they're interested in someone else, and go into a spiral of losing self-confidence. So awareness in that kind of way to the automatic thought processes we have is crucial. And particularly looking at the negative ones. Helpful thought patterns are great. It's the negative thinking patterns that need to be looked at. And CBT provides strategies to change thinking patterns and beliefs about the self, others, and develop more helpful and positive ones. Mindfulness is helpful as well. Now, the definition of mindfulness, the classic one, is it is about the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. Now, we're not talking here about people sitting cross-legged with incense burning. Mindfulness is a much more practical skill and commonplace skill. So the first thing that people can really develop through mindfulness is an awareness of the thoughts and the self-talk that goes on in the kind of uncontrolled mind. So it challenges this idea and the common experience of being lost in thought. So mindfulness first gets us to be aware of that. And one of the ways that it can do that is by directing people's attention to awareness of the body, either just the feelings they have, getting grounded in how they feel, how they're sitting, how they're standing, or by focusing on an object of meditation. It also develops an idea that thoughts are not facts. They are, mental creations. They're not necessarily factual. We need to check them out. And one of the ways it helps do that is that kind of process from being aware of thoughts. It creates a kind of decentering. So the awareness of a thought allows you then to observe what is happening, observe that thought coming into being. And you have then some choice about whether or not this is a thought pattern you're aware of, which is negative, and you can then choose to disregard, or something that you feel more happy with. It's very effective mindfulness, particularly in countering rumination and all the kind of mental difficulties people can have, including loneliness, often have rumination as a central part of that experience. Positive psychology is also very helpful. And Martin Seligman, who's commonly thought of as the originator of positive psychology, he was the president of the American Psychological Association. He stated one of the most significant findings in psychology is that people can choose the way they think. So positive psychology has developed techniques which help people produce emotions, positive emotions, in the intention to override negative ones. It allows people to go, from learned helplessness to learning optimism. So people can actually develop a more optimistic, a more positive mindset, which is very critical in feeling well about yourself. And the evidence seems to suggest that if you have a greater sense of well-being, then the chances of you being lonely are significantly reduced. Its main framework for promoting well-being goes under the acronym PERMA: P for positive emotions, E for engagement and satisfying tasks, R for relationships, communicating with other people, M for meaning and sense of purpose, and A for achievement. So that's a kind of framework for well-being. We have looked at a number of other psychological approaches. One of the ones that warrants further investigation is what's called acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a blend of CBT and mindfulness. And there will be others. So we're very much at the beginning of this journey. So the limitations in this report is it is a first step. We fully recognize that. There's lots of things I'm sure we've missed out, and there's certainly some limited research in this area, and there's a glaring need to develop more research. And also we need to look at approaches to blending, which will be useful. We've talked about these three things: mindfulness, CBT, positive psychology, but there's very little that we're advocating which is about just taking one of these. It's more about blending them, and also blending them with other ways of working with people around loneliness, which Robin's going to talk about in a minute. So finally, our call to action from what we've got so far is that we should use the information in this report to call for organisations to identify which aspects of their work include knowledge of the psychology of loneliness. So can you take this on board? To design future programmes which explicitly include psychological approaches, and to evaluate the impact of these programmes. So that's all from me just now, Paul.
Thank you very much indeed, Guy. Helpful as always. So just to reiterate, the slides will go out on a blog post on the website, and the report, of course, is downloadable from the website. And by the way, Guy has got a great book called 10 Steps of Positive Aging, which is available in all good bookshops. I just thought I'd say that. Finally, in this section, we go very briefly, please, to Robin Hewings, who's Director of Policy at the campaign, and is going to talk to us now. Robin, over to you.
Good evening. Yes, I'll just quickly do the process of sharing my screen. Just so I just want to acknowledge my first slide where we mention our funders. So we've been very generously funded by the National Lottery, and we're hosted by Independent Age. And this specific project came from a grant from the Building Connections Fund that came out of the loneliness strategy for England. And we are very grateful to all of them for their funding and support. So yes, so I wanted to talk a bit about what can be done about these findings. And I think that when I first kind of came into this project, I think I'd presumed that because it was about psychology, that all of what this would be about would be people sitting in rooms and talking to each other. But actually, particularly when we went out and spoke to older people about the findings of this, we found that people brought in the insights of psychology in different ways, often more quite informally, into how they might manage their own loneliness. And sometimes people were doing it really quite explicitly in terms of following ideas around cognitive behavioural therapy, and sometimes it was a bit more informal than that, but kind of the idea of noticing unhelpful thoughts, thinking about what triggers might be, and thinking about ways in which people could think about things to help them manage feelings of loneliness or to avoid it. So that kind of created our first kind of idea that actually the way in which we can use these insights isn't all through kind of direct one-to-one services, but there's a wider role for us to talk about that we can partially tackle loneliness by helping to give people information about how to manage alone and to kind of further the conversation around this. And I think it's something which some of the public messaging there has been around this, and we highlight this in the report, does kind of take us into that territory a bit already, but we think that we think that there's potential to do that more. And then the next kind of level in which we thought this was relevant was that that we can bring in our knowledge of the emotional and psychological aspects of loneliness into other services. And we'll be hearing later on from a really interesting example from Camden, where people have thought about what it is to be lonely, thought about how the groups that they're running could be made more friendly and more welcoming to people, so that lonely people will find it easier to engage with them. And we think there are other examples of where that's relevant, such as social prescribing or bereavement. And I think that it's important to say that this is already being done in many ways through people using their common sense and their understanding of loneliness. But we think that there is some scope to do that slightly more explicitly, so that we can kind of take that even further. And finally, we think that there is a role for those kinds of one-to-one intensive services for people who are chronically lonely. So the people who we're most worried about by practitioners or volunteers who have got kind of specialist training in psychology. And we make some calls in the report about ways in which that could be that can be expanded, because I think that the evidence that this can make a difference to people who are in a really serious situation, we think is enough to justify more work on this. So as you may have been guessed of the way that these fit together, we think that kind of creates three kind of broad categories for how we can bring in the psychology of loneliness into practical action that we can do to tackle loneliness, which are at that kind of population-wide level, the kind of groups and one-to-one. There is, these are not absolutely discrete categories. There is a bit of blurring between the two of them, but we think it's a useful framework for how we can think about what we do about this issue. which takes us into our recommendations that we think is relevant to public health messaging, can be relevant to how we run services, and we think that there's more specialist one-to-one counselling that can be delivered and help people deal who are, as I said, if you're chronically lonely, this is a really serious issue. So it's now time to move into the group session that I think Paul will introduce.
Brilliant, Robin. Thank you very much. Very focused. Yeah, we'd very much like you to take this opportunity now to share some reactions. Particularly, we'd like you to consider the question, how could what you've been hearing be relevant to your work? If you could take that as your key question, go into breakout rooms. We'll be in there until about 11:45. And I wonder if you could please nominate kind of instantly, ascribe, and then just send a few of thoughts from your group to Kalpa at the Campaign to End Loneliness so that we can gather your feedback. Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had, albeit brief, and interesting discussion in your breakout rooms. Thank you very much indeed for that. And if one of you could send Kalpa a few key messages from your breakout group, that would be really helpful. It's all part of a continuing process of listening on our part. And so, this is a dialogue that will go on. I also wanted to apologize for those of you who were trying to get in at the beginning. We had a cap on numbers, which we managed to lift. So sorry if you were kept waiting. What we'd like to do now is go to a couple of presentations which help us sort of, if you like, ground this thinking about the psychology of loneliness in practice, which you find really helpful. So I'm first of all going to invite Edita Bangsa from Sheffield Aging Better, from the wellbeing practitioners, to talk about your work. Welcome, Edita. Thank you for coming. Look forward to hearing you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning from not so sunny Sheffield. Let me attempt to share my presentation with you guys. Okay, so emotional wellbeing practitioners is a part of a bigger program, the program called Age Better in Sheffield, that is funded by the National Lottery Community Fund, and we have started in 2015. So the program started with the idea of being test and learn program to address loneliness and isolation for people age 50 and over. We were very focused on co-production around that particular program. So we wanted it to be co-commissioned, co-governance, have an element of co.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Edita. I'm struggling to see your slides. I wonder if...
Let me just back. Yes, so like I was saying, the co-production was always very important within everything we are doing. So the Age Better in Sheffield program, it's not only just wellbeing practitioners. There's a number of different programs within, and each program focused on different elements. But I'm here today to talk about wellbeing practitioners, which started in 2015 at the very beginning of Age Better in Sheffield. And it was for the very first time in Sheffield where we could offer people counseling sessions in their own homes or other community venues. Prior to that, all sessions were taking place. If it was IAPT, it would be at GP surgeries. If it was run by charities, it would be in their offices. Our wellbeing practitioners project is run by Sheffield Mind, and Sheffield Mind is very well.
Could you speak up, please?
I will, yes. Is that better?
You. Really loud. Yeah, thank you.
So the Wellbeing Practitioner Program is run by Sheffield Mind in here. Sheffield Mind was established many years ago in Sheffield, and people do trust that brand. So Sheffield Mind never lacked people trying to access counseling. And as you can imagine, there was a number of waiting lists to access the service. So it was incredible blessing to be able to open additional big and well-funded service for those people. It's not going to come as a surprise that we didn't have awful lot of over 50s or over 70s, as a matter of fact, accessing counseling. It was not something they would think as a way of helping to address their loneliness and isolation, or boost their well-being in general. So like I said before, the idea behind the project was to offer counseling sessions in people's home, with the idea to then move them to community venue where they would feel comfortable getting into. So that could be their GP practice, that could be local church, library, or other venues that we could get with the access to room as a safe space where we could still adhere to confidentiality and all the essential elements of a counseling sessions. For those who felt comfortable going to our offices, the offer was on the table. And to start with, we had the mixed people who wanted to come to the office, but as we were progressing, people felt that maybe they could try to see us at home. So sometimes it was starting in the office, going back to their home for sessions, and that could be because of a number of different reasons. Could be mobility issues or other health issues. We had the idea to start with, if someone would request counseling in their home but wouldn't feel comfortable after so many sessions, let's say after 3 or 6 sessions, getting to our offices or community venue, we would pair them with the befriender who would try to make that journey, that travel, easier. The Age Better in Sheffield program, like all the Age Better programs around the country, is test and learn program, which meant we had to get as much learning from the project as possible. So there were changes throughout the project, and like you can guess, it's a 5th year that we're operating. Sadly, we just in our 6th year, actually, it's a final year. So there were a lot of changes that we've done to our delivery. So for example, to start with, we were offering around 26 weeks of therapy, but quite quickly we realized if we're offering people 26 weeks of therapy, they might feel that it's okay to miss some, especially at the end. When we change it to it's 6 weeks, then review, and then you can have another 6 weeks and then another review, people stay better engaged and more focused. The project was recommissioned in 2018 because we felt there is still much more learning we can get out of it. So to our kind of standard offer of one-to-one therapy, we added creative therapies, art therapy in a group situation and one-to-one, movement therapy, and also mindfulness. The number of participants, a high number of participants came to counseling because they were experiencing a sense of loss of some kind, and it was resulting from all sorts of changes in their life that included bereavement, ill health, or caring responsibilities. What we have learned while we were running wellbeing practitioners, that the bereavement element was so big that based on that, in 2018, we have commissioned a separate project that focused on bereavement, but it was split into 2 elements. So it was the emotional support as well as practical support. So this is the greatest example that the second project, called The Ripple Effect, was entirely co-designed around what we have learned within wellbeing practitioners. I would like to share now with you guys a short video that's been put together. So that is the best way to describe what the Wellbeing Practitioner Program is about. So you can hear from our participants. So hope you'll be able to see it and hear it clearly.
Hello, I'm Margaret. I'm the Chief Exec here at Sheffield Mind, and we deliver the Emotional Wellbeing Practitioner Service for Age Better. We've been doing that for 4 years here in Sheffield. So the service offers counselling to people who are aged over 50 and are referred to us because they're socially isolated and lonely.
I saw a poster in a hairdresser saying if you are over 50, we do sessions where you might need to talk to somebody.
So I received about 6 months counselling from Joe. It was a big help to me, just to be able to talk about your troubles. And then I did want to volunteer after that, because I didn't know exactly what that meant either. But I think a lot of people do think via a friend they will be able to access something similar, but mine's quite different. You know, they're completely non-judgmental, and they let you speak.
You need someone who can listen and let you get rid of it all and guide you, as we've said, into a situation where you can put it into compartments, you can move it, you can get over it, but you need somebody who can help you, and that's what these people do. I can't thank them enough. I'm a different person to what I walked in.
I've learned to appreciate where I am. Previously to counselling, I used to spend 80% of my life living in the past. Now I spend 80% in the present and just reflecting on the past. So coming to counselling, Richard's been absolutely fantastic with me. And he's seen me on good days and bad days.
Hi, my name's Richard Brocklehurst. I'm the clinical lead here at Sheffield Mind. Within my role as a wellbeing practitioner, we've been very successful engaging with men here, and the main reason for that has been around we've been very open and honest and transparent about how we deal with mental health issues for men, and it can be around cups of tea, talking about the football, very genuine, and it's okay to talk about the feelings, and actually it will help them overcome their emotions to tackle things earlier rather than later.
Hi, I'm Michelle and I took part in the Age Better project last year.
Hello, my name's Stuart. I received counselling, but now I'm a volunteer at Sheffield Mind.
So I'll just quickly go back to a presentation. It's quite a lengthy presentation because there is awful lot to say. As you can imagine, the slides will be available for you guys to look through. Just very briefly, we've used a lot of different methods when it comes to evaluation. We are supported by University of Sheffield in our local evaluation and ECORIS, which is the National Evaluation for Age Better project. All the outcomes you'll be able to see on the presentation once it's share with you guys, and also we invite you to subscribe to our Learning Gazette. All the details on the final slide. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edita. That's a fantastic presentation and very rich in the material you've offered us. And I think sharing is so important. We'll be sharing that through the campaign website, as you say. There's also the sharing that the National Lottery Community Fund is very keen for all the Aging Better projects to share with others across the country. And that's really important. And we look forward to that now. We need to move straight on, please, to another fascinating grounded project, this time in Camden Aging Better. Hello, Karina. Karina Gray, going to talk to us about warm welcome, or warm, fairly brief welcome. Thank you, Karina.
Hello, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. So yes, hello, and thanks everybody for inviting me and my team to talk about our warm welcome approach today. This approach was co-produced with older people in Camden, so I want to start with another video with some of our older people's advisory group sharing their thoughts on what makes a warm welcome and why it's important.
I mean, children's first day at school, going first to university, leaving home, going to a new job, any of these things takes a courage. Always deep down there's this, am I going to be welcome? When I first started going to meetings after I retired, I was very nervous. And then I went to the West Euston Partnership. I went up and down the stairs to the door several times before I finally knocked. And suddenly a lady came forward and said, "Oh, how lovely to see you." And I felt as if, I'd sort of found a new world, discovered a new continent. They were so pleased to see me.
I came to the OPAG, Older People's Advisory Group meeting for the first time just a year ago. Right away, someone welcomed me, gave me a seat that was actually quite near the person leading the meeting, and all in all, I felt welcomed.
To me, a warm welcome is when somebody from the group approaches me, says hello, and initiates conversation.
I was in the essentially smiling faces at the reception, welcoming smile.
It does help to have a phone call to remind me that I should attend. I like to be greeted and introduced to somebody, and it would help tremendously if I had a lanyard with my name, because nobody remembers everybody's name anyhow.
Tea, coffee, bits to eat, and again, all of these things just encourage people like me to talk to others, to get to meet them, to get to feel that I'm welcomed.
A warm welcome to any group is very important to me, because when you go at first, you might be a bit shy, and with someone there to welcome you in front of the door and to show you around makes you more relaxed and comfortable. And with that, you'll want to come back again and to tell others about the group or organization and make it grow bigger and better for everyone in the community.
It is important because it does encourage one to come back to the center.
It makes me feel more comfortable, and it also makes me want to participate in that group of people.
It's important to me to come to these groups because it gets me out of the house, relaxes me, makes my brain work a bit faster. I'm always willing to learn more and to be able to make more friends. Also to get me out of the house and don't look after the grandchildren all the time. I want something to do for myself in my old age and not to just stay home and get lonely and bored.
A warm welcome is important because a person has plucked up the courage to come to this place, and the least they deserve is a warm welcome.
So as Francis, Verdon, Costas, Dennis, Celia and Elizabeth Ann have shared with us there, the outcome we want to achieve with a warm welcome is that people keep returning to activities because they've been made to feel welcome in that group, place or space. They can then take full advantage of the social connections on offer and start to develop a sense of belonging in their community. So we see a warm welcome as a pull, and as you can see here, this is the journey an ABC participant might take when they're working into an activity. Stuff like the community connectors or social prescribing is motivating people with a push by helping them find what activity they might want to do and encouraging them to take the first steps. But when they get to the activity, they need a little more to be pulled in and held so they know that they're a valued member of that group and that their individual needs are being recognised. So a little bit of background to the warm welcome approach is that at the beginning of our programme, we made the assumption that this was already happening, that as soon as somebody who felt socially isolated or lonely stepped over the threshold of an activity, they were being pulled in this way. We did a review after year 2, which showed that actually this wasn't always the case. Older people told us that the majority of them had actually had an experience of an unfriendly or unwelcoming activity relatively recently. They'd been told that they couldn't sit there, or that seat was saved. There wasn't a smiling face when they walked through the door, let alone if they got eye contact from the receptionist. So, as Frances said in the video, we think the least older people deserve is a warm welcome. But if you're feeling socially isolated or lonely, you need a little bit extra to help you engage in the activity and remain connected. So we went about designing the warm welcome approach and piloting it with our delivery agencies. Some of the key elements of our approach are clear information leaflets to start with that have a map, a telephone number, and a name of a person you'll meet when you walk into a room. Meeters and greeters, and this includes reception staff when you walk into maybe a community centre looking for an activity, as well as the person leading the activity and other older people that are taking part. It's always nice when you walk into a conference or an event to have a smiling face and be introduced to someone or told where you can make a cup of tea. We also put a lot of emphasis on the time that practitioners need around activities to keep in touch with people. So we encourage people to make phone calls after somebody's visited an activity for the first time to make sure they've enjoyed it, and if they still have any anxieties that perhaps they can look at the second time they come. We also encourage regular phone calls to those who might need them because they have memory issues or they need extra support to actually get to an activity. We also encourage calls when somebody who regularly comes hasn't turned up for a while, and to just check in on them and have a system of doing this. We think that a really important part of belonging is somebody noticing when you're missing. We also think it's nice to have people who are able to recognise that somebody might not have come because they're going through something difficult, like a bereavement, or they've had a stay in hospital. A simple card from the group reminds them that they're always welcome to come back. It's also really important to say that we recognise how significant the skills, expertise, and knowledge of staff are that do this work. Some people we've talked to about this approach have said, oh, it's not rocket science, but actually we disagree with this. A friendly, positive atmosphere has to be cultivated by somebody who has confidence in their skills and knowledge and is supported to do it well. Activity providers have lots to think about when they're running an activity, difficult group dynamics, sometimes behaviour that challenges, as well as offering a warm welcome, so they really need to be supported. We're looking into producing resources as part of this work, especially around the ABC legacy, and you can follow the development of this work on our website, which I'll share at the end. It's also important to mention that we know this approach costs more. It's not just about a yoga teacher and a room hire. We're working with commissioners and funders because we know that the VCS often overoffer in funding bids, saying that they can do something when actually they're already really stretched to capacity. And we think, unfortunately, after the COVID pandemic, this is likely to get worse because of the impact it's had on all of us. Working with those who are socially isolated or lonely after the pandemic will also be particularly challenging. The extra fears and anxieties that will have affected older people who are already feeling lonely or socially isolated, and the effect on their mental health, is something we don't even know the full impact of yet. A warm welcome approach will be more important than ever to help these people get back out into the community and to reap the benefits of social activities safely. And I'd just like to end the presentation by letting you know that we're really thrilled that some of our delivery agencies are already thinking about innovative and creative ways to run safe, socially distanced activities to encourage older people to come back out into the community and spend time with each other. Thanks very much.
Karina, thank you ever so much. I found both yours and Adita's presentations really uplifting, inspiring, and I particularly like the fact that, Karina, you focused on like the human aspects of making social prescribing work. It's a great opportunity, but we have to address all the human and psychological aspects to that. So really grateful to you for that. A lot of stuff happening in the chat, which is great, and we will look at that and capture that. And there's a lot of stuff about the investment case that we need to make. You know, maybe social prescribing will be an opportunity to get greater investment. But the campaign is continuing to look at how we can make the investment case for, you know, building these wonderful things that can happen. So now we're going to go into a breakout again, and the task here is how can this work be taken forward, and by whom? If you have 15 minutes, please, I hope you can get into your breakout room okay, nominate a scribe and send Kalpa a few thoughts. That would be great. See you in 15 minutes. Thank you. Well, welcome back, everybody, and thanks very much for participating in that. And if you could ask your loyal scribe to email Kalpa a few thoughts, that would be great. We're now finally going to ask a couple of colleagues to feedback very, very briefly, 2 minutes absolute maximum, please, from their group to give us a flavour of what's been going on in the discussions. So first of all, if we can turn to Andy Langford from Cruise Bereavement Care. There you are. Hi, Andy.
Hello there. It's good to be here. Thanks so much. Thanks so much to all the speakers and everyone involved. I just want to feedback a couple of main points, really. So I'm looking down at lots of the rich discussion, really. I think one of the things that came up from the initial conversation, which comes along to the second one as well, really, which is the importance of psychologically informing staff and volunteers. So we're speaking a collective language, really. But then at the same time, and this bridged onto the second conversation, which is around how whatever interventions we have, they've got to be, to use one of a better phrase, personalised. It has to be best suited for the individual. We talked a little bit about how online is really good and great for accessibility, but at the same time, often for people, there's no substitute to face-to-face conversation. So that's me in brief, but there's lots more things I'll get over to Kalpa.
Great, Andy. Good to see you. Thanks very much for that. And now I'm going to turn to Joe Pybus from the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy. Thank you very much, Joe.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, we also had a really rich conversation, and some of the key things that came out of ours were around the importance of bringing people together, collaboration across researchers, funders, various third sector organisations, but particularly around the alignment of how to measure, making sure we're all talking about the same thing and evaluating the same thing, so that we have a stronger research case to be able to put forward a lobby for the necessary funds to be able to make the necessary changes in this area and move this work forward. And there was a consensus in our group around the need to, talk as a community about what those tools should be and how we should be measuring, and that was the key thing, but also making sure we bring in people with lived experience into that conversation as well. And there's a lot more which I'll send on to Kalpa, but that was the crux of it.
Joe, brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for that. And so we're now moving to wind up, and my only summary point is to ask us all to stay in touch with one another in this sort of sharing and learning community, and we can assist with that. Kalpa's going to be circulating loads of stuff around the presentations and discussions, and Kelly Payne will be sending out an evaluation very soon via email, which we're asking you really to help us by filling in, just to help us move on so that we can keep this dialogue going. So it just remains to me to say thank you. Thank you to John from Glowcast for pulling all the strings to make this happen. Thank you, John. Brilliant expert speakers. Wonderful to hear from you. Thank you, all of you, for that. Thank you, everybody. I hope that this brief insight or collection of insights has given you an appetite to read the report in full, read the discussions, and keep in touch with the sharing and learning. But I just wanted to say, from the Campaign to End Loneliness, thank you very much indeed for coming.